Welcome, everybody, to the AI Pulse podcast. So, we're actually at the Austin AI Summit hosted by Abby here. And I'm joined today with an awesome guest. I'm going to let him introduce himself, but we're actually going to cover the topic of the way that technology is evolving at massive paces. And we want to get a very different type of perspective on the podcast today. So, I'm going to turn it over to Adrian. Adrian, first of all, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here, Max. Yeah, so my name's Adrian Bridgwater. I'm a freelance technology journalist, and I've been doing that, attempting to perform that role for about 25 years now. Primarily, I work for Computer Weekly, which we're owned by TechTarget, and I have responsibility for covering the developer and the open source columns or blogs or issue tracks, if you like. And as I say, I am freelance. I work for a number of other titles, including a Dutch magazine called TechZine and various others over the years. That's what I do.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on to the podcast. So I find it very interesting immediately you focused on, okay, I covered the tool tracks, the open source, all of that. And like I said, the thing that we're going to cover today is about how fast technology is evolving, specifically artificial intelligence, because that is the talk of the town. Maybe as a starting point, how do you see the state of AI this year in 2025? And I'm actually really interested in how you see the open source community evolving around that, because I think that has definitely picked up in steam. That's my view of it, but you're covering it in depth. So I'm interested to get your perspective.
I think the open source, to answer your question backwards, as it were, open source I feel is inherently more concerned with cloud infrastructure. It's not the most immediate connection because of Kubernetes and because of all of the cloud native initiatives that are going on. There obviously open source AI. A lot of the AI has stemmed from open models. We did that. That's undeniable.
Yeah.
But I don't. If you ask me to say the next two words after open source, I'd say cloud infrastructure. But to your very first point, there is how is AI sat now, and where do we go? It's been I think you said 18, give us the last 18 months or something. The last 18 months has been ridiculous. It's been crazy.
Yeah.
I went to a meeting with a database company in Mountain View 18 months ago. And on my way there, we were talking about AI within the data management platform. And between getting to the hotel and actually meeting the CEO, it was like, actually, no, we're going to talk about RAG. So it was like, okay, so I have quite as much knowledge of retrieval augmented generation the night before that I have done that morning and then subsequently. But
Yeah.
and then the last 6 months, open language models, but really we should focus on small language models too for specificity and domain aligned knowledge, which is resonant and redolent of what RAG was doing anyway with its narrowing. And then guess what? Now agentic services. So it's by Christmas, it will be something else.
It will be something else.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Maybe it's typically a question I keep for the end, but we're on the topic anyway. We're talking about Christmas already. So if you had to make a prediction, crystal ball, any kind of prediction, free reign, what would you make as prediction that we're probably going to see around Christmas time?
What, the state of AI?
State of technology, because I think this is the interesting bit for me, is that there's so much focus on artificial intelligence right now, but you immediately went like, there's the infrastructure, there is the layer about the consumption, energy, economics, everything. I was actually, before I came here to Austin, I was in DC, and I was sitting next to somebody from the UK, funny enough, at the bar. And he was like, oh, there's this massive data center convention happening right now in DC, and everything that we're talking about is about the energy consumption of artificial intelligence in data centers. So I think the whole, kind of exponential growth that we're seeing right now of technology in itself is having an impact in so much more things than just, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think you said two things there which are really important regarding where we go to with tech and really well with AI in particular, which is I would, if I had to predict what I think the industry will be saying or doing by Christmas, it'll be, there'll be some attempt at additional standardization, and for sure there'll be some productization to possibly move some of the functions towards them being rather more self-service. And I know that's a topic that Abby talks about, getting the tools ready for the software engineering function to be able to initiate and instantiate themselves without having to spend a week with operations or an ongoing process. So I think that's what the tech industry would will possibly inevitably say is that things are becoming more packaged. I think you said sustainability, or as Ada said, you said you were kind of leaning towards power. If you saw the trend with the Chat GPT make me into a action figure
Oh yeah,
doll,
the action figure.
the
Did you try it?
I played with it. Yeah, I look very short. Yeah, and I had a backpack, but it couldn't spell the North Face, which I thought was disappointing. It's such a well-known brand because I always have a North Face backpack with my laptop,
Yeah.
and it couldn't spell North Face. I think if it's got a fundamental error like that, then that's telling. But the story that the BBC tech editor wrote was not just on, oh, isn't it cute, because she'd done it. It was, do you know, I mean, because if you've hit go on it, it takes a minute or two.
Yeah,
And
it
it's,
does.
oh my God, how many blade servers are churning over in which data centers? And how much emissions is this creating just because we all think something's funny
Yeah.
and fun? That's a really bad thing, because as humans wasting everything, time for one.
And OpenAI actually had to scale up because they gave it away even in the free version, and that meant that everybody wanted to have a go at it. I saw so many posts about it that everybody turned themselves into this Barbie doll box and were like, okay, all the features. And you can't get it right from the first go. But yeah, if you then kind of extrapolate that back into, okay, how much energy did that actually consume? It's a bit scary.
I think it's particularly if you're in your sort of late 50s, as I am, somebody asked me what did I want to do journalistically going forward. And I just said, kind of put a bit more compassion and care back, really, because I think in your youth, you're just trying to win. And,
Yeah.
you're just quite, and if you're a man, you're bullheaded and stupid. Actually trying to be a bit more caring and worry about the effects of things. That would be great if that becomes more of a concern industry wide. But even I think it just gets sometimes lost under, isn't it ESG?
ESG,
Yeah,
yeah.
ESG initiatives perhaps aren't specific enough. And yeah, I mean that particular example with the doll, it should have been an app, and people should have had to pay for it.
Yeah.
And if it should have been a carbon neutral app, such that the money would go into, I don't know, rainforest. But yeah, it would be good. More tech for good would be needed.
Yeah.
For sure.
And you mentioned small language models earlier, and that's actually that, we at Abby focus on a lot because we wanted to make sure that the technology that we built is purpose-built, that is focused on the specific thing it's supposed to deliver, and especially enterprise environments. You already mentioned the word agentic AI. That's the thing right now. And funny enough, I was talking to a vendor in agentic, and we were having a conversation about how they started out with pure agentic, meaning in their definition, because the jury's still out on the exact definition of agentic, if you ask me. And so they said we went from agentic in their definition being that the agent can decide how they go from point A to point B, which is where the end solution is to be, and it can decide on its own how to get there, doing all of the automations, doing all the interactivity with other systems. And they said once we wanted to introduce that into enterprise, we kind of hit a roadblock because the enterprise, the organization had too much rules, compliance, and everything else and limitations to actually be able to do that. So they kind of pivoted back into this hybrid mode between good old-fashioned BPM and then some of the steps actually being a sub-process, agentic sub-process. And I thought that's really interesting because right now the market is hyping up agentic AI agents and everything will just get figured out. All you have to do is write down the task and it will happen. But once you actually start doing that at scale in practice, you get back to the point that organizations don't run in that particular fashion. Do you kind of see the same thing or you're like, no, Max, you're entirely off the mark on this one?
I don't know. Isn't agentic the base? There's obviously a highly autonomous, more autonomous than ever previously tool set, but with a bit of a flair for non-deterministic creativity, which would be opposed to, sit in opposition to the to standard business rules BPM. So maybe there'll be like cloud finally, well, after its first 5 years, we quite quickly realized that the hybrid was best. Maybe it's the next trend, hybrid AI, some agentic, but only within confined rules and, within defined spaces. But because AI can't provide a human empathy and still needs human in the loop handoff processes. But I think that is the way it's going anyway. You don't plug your life support systems into completely randomized AI tools yet because there aren't enough guardrails, which is there's a whole data conversation there in terms of what you're going to expose the models to anyway. And if you put too many guardrails up, then they don't learn enough, and they don't get access to all the right things. There's this huge, like, sort of equilibrium of services, data layers, and tools that don't fit together yet,
No.
but may even already exist. And it almost comes back to orchestration and Kubernetes and open source. It's kind of like how we weave it all together may
Yeah.
be the defining legacy, or inside this decade at least, anyway.
It's interesting that you put it that specific way, because the thing that I've continuously said is, look, don't specifically try to pin yourself onto one single technology. And I think that is honestly, a trap that a lot of organizations still fall into. Oh, we're going to go for this type of tech. And especially now that with Gen AI, we're going to go for large language models. It will solve a lot of problems, all of our problems. And I think now that's kind of evolving into, after the, bit of the like downward cycle of maybe LLMs are not exactly what we thought it to be, but now with Agentic, that looks like the next thing that will solve all of our problems in an incredibly easy way. And so for me, it does feel like a trap to go into kind of a single type of technology mindset. Whereas you said, the orchestration of it, how it all comes together, all of the different bits and pieces, the data layer, the infrastructure layer, the actual technology, and you go up and upwards. And at the end, you still have to end up at, what does it do for the business, especially for in a business context? Because that's where it has to start from.
But with every open, composable element of architecture that we try and put together, there's just this absolute equal and opposite trade-off in terms of the complexity that it introduces. And then you get blocks being put together that don't fit together, blocks of code, blocks of software functionality, automations, data pipelines that are incongruent and have absolutely no normalization of data, such that things just basically is round pegs and square holes, and all the missed connections that come about that result through misconfiguration. It's just kind of like how you almost need an openness barometer, or some way of being able to gauge just how loosely coupled we should make everything.
Yeah.
If you spend time at the summits that focus on, well, Kubernetes, really, a lot of people complaining about complexity, over provisioning, so again, waste, and do you want freedom or do you want exact control? ERP companies about a decade ago, and they got a lot of, obviously, process management. They had been toying with the idea of outcomes-based pricing.
Yeah.
So that you would only pay for the amount of services that equate to the amount of business profits, or the other business, possibly some social good in there as well. But however much you got out, but that's not possible very often unless you've got an incredibly standardized, regulated set of processes. So if it's a football stadium that sells an exact number of tickets, that you can define. But most businesses don't know what's going to go on. If it's a sellout deal that will happen, then you can put standardization on it. But if it's a normal course of business, if it's a corner shop or anything else, I think we're on the road to defining a lot of that. And I mentioned healthcare and how much you plug an AI system into it. We are codifying and encoding a lot of the things that will be needed to be able to hand over a lot of those tasks to AI. And so you'll get nurses being able to do some of the things that doctors can do, or within approved guidelines.
And I think that already falls into the category of that's tech for good, because that is enhancing the type of care that we can deliver, especially with, socioeconomics. If you look at it, everybody's getting older and older. So we'll have more to do there. It's as simple as that. So it's interesting that you mentioned specifically healthcare. Is that something that you've been focusing on and you've seen a lot of, I would say, growth in how fast that's going? I'll give you my perspective, right? So whenever I have worked with healthcare organizations, government, private, does not really matter. There's so many compliance and restrictions and everything else. So then you introduce this non-deterministic technology that can be incredibly helpful. Like you said, they will be able to do things doctors do within the right guardrails, that you would follow it up immediately with that. How do you think that we're going to handle all of that? Is that complex?
If I could answer that question competently, I wouldn't be sat here, would I? Health tech and fintech, or financials, given that my editorial remit is supposed to be just all software engineering platform and tools, not necessarily aligned to customers or specific industries, but I haven't been able to help myself covering health and finance, because they're the two that seem to be most ripe for it, really. How we're going to handle it all, I don't know. You would hope that if I'm supposed to be a journalist, that I would follow the most pertinent things. And, we're not hearing an awful lot of, I'm sure it exists in retail, and point of sale systems are getting very smart and all that kind of thing, but it doesn't make the news.
Yeah.
It doesn't make the tech trade press that I gravitate within. So how are we going to do it? I don't know. I think all the solutions are non-industry related anyway. And I think the biggest, best solutions that are going to be translated, so they should be applicable to everything. So it will be construction as well, and it will be food. And I used to work a lot with a big ITSM company, and the CTOs used to talk about the way a good piece of technology is just as suitable to deployment on an oil rig as it is in a cake bakery.
Yeah.
Just, it have to be a big bakery, but it's the fact that it's a business and it's modular and it's definable, and you can, you can put software behind most of these things. How are we going to do the whole thing? I don't know, Max.
I love these type of open questions because that gets different perspectives. I also don't know. Both of us are sat here because we don't know the answer. So another interesting thing that happened quite recently. So let me know if you saw the video. It was all over LinkedIn. It was even, I think, even on mainstream news. So there was actually this video where two AI agents started talking to each other. All right. The one was calling the other to say, I want to make a reservation in a hotel or a restaurant. And one asked the question, hey, are you an AI agent? And the other one answered yes. And they just said, should we switch over to whatever language? And they started talking in signals instead of actual English conversation. And so how that was then portrayed over the internet was like, oh, it's happened. Terminators here. They're talking to each other. We
Right.
can't understand them anymore. The funny thing is, and this is why, I wanted to see if you'd seen that, because I think it was definitely misportrayed in a lot of different ways because it was not that entirely. Actually, what the video was a setup done by, if I'm not mistaken, it was 11 Labs. They did a hackathon, and the agents were instructed to ask that question.
I didn't see it.
And then they were even instructed to switch to a man-made communication language that uses tones. But the way that was presented in the mass media, I just found it really interesting how quickly people immediately jumped like, oh, this must be absolutely true. Do you see a lot of that happening simply because there's so much information that's coming out of technology, artificial intelligence, everything else right now?
I don't think
There's so much of it.
I don't see that much of it happening. I think machine to machine communications, that's a huge mystery for not just consumers and business people. I think for a lot of technologists, and it's quite hard to tell that's a fun story in a sense. I haven't seen a lot of it. I think it's happening. Only because I happened to be in San Francisco, and I'd seen the autonomous vehicles in Las Vegas when they still had one person in the front, and I think then you could see that the person wasn't driving. And then of course now you have Waymo,
Yeah.
which I think's here in Austin.
Oh yeah, I saw my first Waymo when I got here. It was so impressive.
So I saw one go round a corner, stop as I walked in front of it, and then somebody pulled out quite dangerously. And the Waymo was very good at stopping, and then not just going forward just quickly, just edging forward. It was almost like this guy's it's pulled out quite erratically. And then I didn't see this, a colleague of mine told me he saw two of them have a face-off against each other because they both pulled into a box junction at the same time.
Yeah.
And you felt, Christ, the machines are trying to work out, they're trying to out-machine each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's ephemeral and nascent, that it's not something we know a lot about yet. And this is only two very tech cities in the US that even have this. Is there a third or fourth city?
I don't think so.
But the rest of the world has not a clue.
Not a clue. And
We're in,
the other funny thing I saw about Waymos is that at night they all go to this parking lot.
Yeah.
Do you see that one?
hang out together.
And hang out together, but they all trying to find the space, and when they're blocking each other, they start honking. Yes, I'll find that later, together with the other video. But
And the audio, the sensors pick up a horn sound.
yeah, a horn
which
sound,
is-
and then basically they all start honking at each other to go out of the way. It's a hilarious video. But the people that live there in the buildings around that parking lot, they're just like every single night is like honk scenario, because they're all trying to find a spot to park in.
Bluetooth or something.
You'd think so. It's amazing what the technology can already do. Self-driving cars, and then something as simple as just, okay, for the night, just go to your parking lot and park. But all of the technology is coming more and more into mainstream media. And the reason I asked you about the agent story talking to each other is I'm thinking it's very important because it is going into mainstream media, and people do not have a massive understanding about everything that actually sits underneath the actual technology, all the way down to, like you said, the infrastructure. I think it's important that we give the level of detail that in an understandable way, simply because otherwise people will immediately go to Terminator, Skynet kind of scenarios and get quite scared of technology that will continue to influence our lives, whether we like it or not.
I almost said average consumers, and that's I just people
Yeah.
in general, people that aren't in tech. How long's the iPad been around? Like 15 years or six?
Sure.
People didn't know what an app was.
Oh yeah.
And then, if you sat on a airplane and somebody says, "What do you do?" And I say, "I'm a technology writer," and they go, "What what do you cover?" And you can say cloud, you can say databases, but you can't say system calls. There's a log file analysis and command line syntax, and they probably never will because that's far too specific.
Yeah.
But I think there's a progression where everybody's got an idea that they need, that their business should have a certain amount of data analytics, whereas they don't have to actually go and concern themselves with the batch processing overnight builds. They might be interested to know that their apps, their companies switch to a real-time system so that you don't have to wait for that till tomorrow because you're already using it because your field service app has already, processed your order when you are 30 miles away from the office and you met customer X.
Yeah.
So all that kind of thing. Yeah, I think that it's all sinking in. But who am I to talk about this? Because the Gen Zs are pretty compliant with it already, I would have thought.
And so I have an interesting perspective on that. I was born with technology kind of coming up. I'm from '88, and my first computer was a Macintosh. I was 12 years old. I went through the whole 56K modem, went to ISDN, MSN, everything that came with that. So the whole kind of start, I wouldn't say the start of the internet, but then how it started evolving very quickly. And now when I talk to a couple of nephews that are definitely in the Gen Z category, they know how to work TikTok massively, much better than I would ever understand it. But then when you go into the actual techie side of it, and you're asking like, okay, do you know how this works? Or do you understand how that actually is doing the thing that you're doing with it? They're like, oh no, we have no clue. It seems like they've stopped at a different layer.
They assume the infrastructure's there.
Yeah. And it just magically happens. And they're also not really that interested. Where I'm like, okay, I saw how it all evolved. So I have an understanding when I'm doing something, what is going on behind the scenes.
Oh, I don't know if we're being old farts about this, but
That hurts me a little bit more.
yeah, no, I'm not with you, don't worry about it. No, my first computer was a Sinclair ZX81. A little bit later, I had a Compaq LTE 286.
Yeah.
So that was Sinclair Basic and DOS. If you want to be able to use those machines, fun for us back then was editing the BIOS so that it would come up with your name.
Yeah.
And actually, without going too much on a different tangent, my nephews, they're in their 30s. They asked me why I was always so fascinated with full 3D perspective role-playing games like Assassin's Creed and Tomb Raider and all those. I said, because we had the Atari 2600 and the adventure game was a dot. So like things are in 3D now. So I think it's a shame but I'm sure there's enough of them that want to go back and do the reverse engineering and learn it.
Oh yeah.
So we wouldn't have any programmers. But I get your point. They may be comfortable with just saying,
Yeah.
I'm plugging into this. Yeah. You've seen the video of the baby. I think when she touching a magazine like it was an iPad.
Yeah, like it was an iPad.
Yeah, why
trying to
not?
like, yeah. Oh, my daughter still runs at the television because she's so used to it and tries to tap it because it's yet another screen. That's just how it works.
Yeah, I got a new Chromebook last month and I started doing that thinking, oh God, I didn't realize I bought that one. Yeah, it does happen, doesn't it?
It does happen.
But
The save icon, it's not a floppy disk, it's a save icon.
I know.
That one made me feel like, oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
I've switched generations now.
Yeah. Everyone should have a 3.5-inch floppy coffee coaster or whatever.
Yeah.
Something like that.
All right. So to kind of wrap up, one last question that I've got for you. You're a tech journalist. You monitor a lot of things that are happening in the space right now. If you would have to share one particular story, what's stuck in your mind since the last, I don't know, 6 months? You can choose a time frame that you want to go for, but what's one thing that you want to share? Okay, if I'm giving you guys anything out of this being on the podcast, that would be the story that I want you guys to know.
God, that's really difficult.
It's a difficult question, I know.
It's because they go through me like a dose of salts. I think it's hard to think of anything that was so impactful. The stories that stick in my mind are the ones where people think it was great, like the ones that people really appreciate, that weren't just, here's a point release 2.8 dot whatever,
Yeah.
and they're kind of answering a question from an angle in a sense. But I wrote a very simple story called "What's the Difference Between a Software Product and a Platform?" and it went quite viral. I thought it was worth it telling that story because it was the week Zuckerberg was in for a trial and he kept referring to the platform. And I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, I don't think people know what a platform is. Do they know that Uber don't make maps? Because it's a platform. They use it as a platform play where there's a plugin for an API. So is it Google Maps? So Google Maps is a platform you can build something on top of it. So those are really good ones. And I think probably the first time I did the rise of low code software and actually explaining that, because I think at the time people thought that there was no coding and it was just a bit lower, that kind of thing, that went down very well, just because and I think I managed to speak to all, if there were 5, I'm sure there were probably 10, but I spoke to the 5 biggest players in the market at that time. That was pretty important. And so it's kind of like telling the right story at the right time.
Yeah.
So that's constantly what I'm trying to do all the time. And, so maybe a couple of years ago, I think I did serverless and headless systems, that kind of thing, because it started to become part of the psyche of the way the industry was talking, that you'd have separated logic and headless systems. And that's the way the things actually manifest themselves in our real lives. You might check in at the airport and it's using something that's actually got the same structure as something you use on your laptop and that kind of thing. Those are real favorites. Other than that, anytime I've managed to write a story without AI in it, really, at the moment.
That
At the
is
moment,
that is definitely an exception right now.
that's a good day.
That's a good day.
Those
That is
days.
a good day. The ones that you touched on, I do feel like we've kind of come full circle in the conversation because the things that you mentioned, it is all about the orchestration that we talked about at the beginning. And like you said, you're using something at the airport, but there's the orchestration of all of the tools behind it that actually make your life very convenient at that point in time. To wrap up, I'll tell my experiences coming in here, flying into Austin, and I went to the baggage drop and everything worked fine. The scanner was scanning my passport. The database was providing all the data back to the screen, to the kiosk. And at the end of the day, it was the printer that failed and it didn't print my baggage ticket. So I had to go all the way around to the other check-in desk and try to get it done there because I was checked in and my bag was checked in because the system said it came out, but it didn't. So it's all about the orchestration, and sometimes it's the simplest things like printing something that fails and makes it quite complicated
I
afterwards.
live in quite central London, and I didn't like it, but my wife loved that we used to have a smart car in banana yellow, which was not good, but we had to have it rebooted.
Really?
Yeah, the only thing that there was nothing wrong with the engine, but it couldn't drive the thing. If you look underneath, there's this like huge serial adapter plug,
Yeah.
and I took it to some guy that ran a garage under an archway in some far off part of East London, and managed to keep it running by literally connecting the battery. I had to unplug the battery to be able to turn the car off
Yeah.
until he plugged his laptop into my car. So there's over engineering for you.
There you go.
Your airport. Yeah, we don't want too much tech.
No.
Just enough.
Just enough to make our life easy. Adrian, thank you again for joining us and also to the audience to listen to the podcast. Adrian, if people want to find more from you, if they're interested by all the stories that you mentioned, where should they go?
I still use Twitter or X if you prefer. I'm very accessible on LinkedIn, and as long as you spell Bridgewater without an E in the middle, I'm quite easy to find due to the unusual spelling. I'm happy to connect with everybody on those socials.